start recording. I'll go ahead and start recording the meeting right now. Just want to check in with you all, see how you all are doing. And I've wanted to just open, before we get started, open up the floor and see if anyone had any initial questions or comments. If you don't at this time, that's quite all right. And at the end of today's Zoom meeting, you'll have the opportunity to, if you have any questions about what I've covered or anything that we're doing. So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and feel free to share. If it's something that is more applicable to your own particular situation, then go ahead and maybe we can talk about it after class when the session's done. But if it applies to the class as a whole, go ahead and let us know if you have any questions. Okay. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and unmute yourself from here on forward, but I'll go ahead and continue. First, want to talk about what we're working on right now, which is, of course, we've been reading the history of Mexico textbook. We've been doing discussion assignments. We've been completing knowledge check assignments, and more specifically, last week and this week, you have time to work on the annotated bibliography. So what does that involve? Really, if you take a look at the essay prompt, it's discussed or listed as the preliminary draft, excuse me. So the annotated bibliography is a list of potential sources that you have reviewed for use in your essay. This is like a preview, in other words. These are potential sources. You're welcome to, add and delete to this list as you move forward with your research process. But I think the advantage of creating this annotated bibliography is that it helps you kind of identify the strengths and weaknesses of your sources. And it gives me just a brief discussion of the usefulness of each source. You already have one source in your possession, which is the textbook. And from there, you're asked to, dig and research and find additional sources. So it's like a works cited page, but there's some minor differences. So I wanted to ask you all today, what is the difference between the annotated bib and the works cited page? What's the difference that you noticed between these two documents?
Works cited page just has the links to where you found it, right?
Yeah, the works cited page is not as complete of a list. It's a list of your sources. The annotated bibliography has the annotations below each of the sources, and that is the area where you're going to explain, provide me some detail about the source. Is it a journal article? Is it a book? Is it a newspaper article? Is it an artifact or some kind of like government document that was produced by the Spanish, or was it something that was produced by the Aztecs or the United States government? And so the second question is, what is the second part of that preliminary draft? You've heard me talk about the research paragraph, or like this little blurb that I'm asking you to write. So I want to give you kind of the questions that you should answer. And when you submit the annotated bibliography, you have two options. You can either include that little paragraph in your annotated bib, like at the end or the beginning, it doesn't matter the location, or you can just type it in like the comments. There's usually a box that you have when you can submit your assignment that allows you to put some comments. Hey, professor, this is late, or hey, professor, I forgot to put this in the document. I hope it's okay. There you can also type that paragraph. So I'll show you and I'll reiterate the options that you have. All right, so with those questions in mind, let's see, what's the difference here between the annotated bibliography and the works cited page? Well, the main difference is that annotation that I referenced, that someone had mentioned, the works cited page. Sorry, I didn't catch the name of who commented, but the works cited page is essentially just a list of the sources that you've used. There's one additional difference I think that you might want to consider is the works cited page is found usually at the conclusion of the process, right? That's something you list at the end of your essay. Now for your essay, you have to write an essay that's 5 to 7 pages. Does that include the works cited page, or does that not include the works cited page? Who remembers from the research prompt? In other words, can you count the works cited page as part of the 5 to 7 pages? Because that makes a difference of how much you're going to have to write, right? Go ahead and tell me in the chat, is it included or is it not included in that number, the 5 to 7 pages? All right, and then the additional difference is that the annotated bib is usually completed prior to you writing the essay. All right, thank you, Angelo, Taylor, Ramon, Gilberto, Guadalupe. Everybody says it's those folks that chimed in. Thank you. It is included. So you could technically, I mean, if you wanted to make it as brief as possible, you could technically write four pages plus your works cited will get you to that 5-page minimum. And I think there's some advantages to that. It really depends on your writing style. Are you the type of writer who can concisely and succinctly write about that topic in 4 pages? Kind of tell me the bigger picture and provide detail within 4 pages? Or are you the type of writer who is kind of long-winded and has to explain something in great detail, and it takes you a lot of time to explain, which is fine as well. So consider your writing style, consider your topic. We have classmates who are talking about a wide array of different topics. And before I move forward, does anybody need help with choosing an essay topic? There was a couple of people that had some difficulties and reached out to me. So if you still are not decided, message me or type in the chat and say, yes, can you talk a little bit about that? I'll be glad to mention some topics. I have a little list that might be useful for folks who are like wrestling with ideas about the topic. Okay, so I'll talk about that before we leave today, just some potential topics. And probably the first piece of advice that I want to give you regarding your topic is think about is it a broad topic? Is it a very specific topic? Are you talking about one historical event, or are you talking about a group or a larger time period? Those are some of the things to consider when you're talking about your essay topic. Is it okay to change your topic? Yeah, it's okay. It's definitely okay to change your topic. Now is the time to really look at all the potential options and make a decision so you can move forward with the research process. And even some of you who have chosen topics, I might have asked you, for instance, what year is this taking place? What region? Say you said, I'm going to talk about women in colonial society, for instance, as one of the topics. I would ask where, when. Those are kind of the two initial questions. Are you talking about Mexico City? Are you talking about the North? Are you talking about the South? Are you talking about the coast? There's going to be variations in the ways in which those women live those experiences in colonial Mexico. So therefore, we want to try to hone in on what we're gonna research. And in other cases, it might be a little broader, and that's fine. So before we conclude today, after the break, I'll talk about I'll share a list of potential topics, and I'll just answer any questions that you have. So thank you all for reaching out in the chat. So this is the primary difference between the works cited page and the annotated bibliography page. Is one I think is best suited for the beginning stages. It helps you sift through your sources. Are they difficult to read? Are they difficult to comprehend? Is it maybe targeted to such a specific academic audience that maybe it's not useful because you're having to spend so much time contextualizing that source? So just it gives you that opportunity to say, yes, this is an awesome source, or I'm not too sure, I'm still going to list it, I'm still going to talk about it. I still want to get the points from Professor Luna, but I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% sold on this essay topic. Has anyone ran into sources that they were like, I'm not too sure if this is going to work? Um, and let me know, either share with us, or type in the chat and let me know what's going on. Okay, the research process paragraph. This is the other part of the preliminary draft. This is like the little blurb that I'm asking you about. I don't know why I keep coming back to that word. It just rolls off the tongue for some reason. But I just want to get a feel for where you're at. In addition to doing this research, how's everything going? How are you feeling about this? What is holding you up? Is it something beyond your control? Are you limited with access to technology? Are you having a difficult time finding space to work? My office is in my bedroom, so sometimes it gets difficult to do the work. And I want to create more videos for the class. I want to do those additional things. Sometimes it's just hard to have a space without any interruption. So luckily for our classes, I'm a little bit more prepared for that, but other times it can be a little difficult. So you can tell me a little bit about that as well. Provide a snapshot of how the research process has been going so far. What have you accomplished up to this point? I've accomplished nothing. That's fine. Let me know. Because then we can start dialoguing, and I can hopefully help you, reach that goal of completing this part of the essay. What challenges are you facing? I just mentioned, some of the personal challenges. Maybe you're working, you got the family, or you got, somebody you're helping. So that all plays into your success in the class, and I want to be sensitive to that. And I've been in that scenario of trying to balance everything, so it can get overwhelming sometimes. What areas do you plan to focus or improve upon? Well, like, say I'm going to block out this time and I'm going to ask my family, can you guys go watch a movie? I'm going to go work in the room. And that's one of my strategies that I have. When they're watching a movie on a Thursday, Friday night or something, I'll try to come and get work done. And then is there anything else you want to share, in addition to those like external factors? It can also be, you want to improve your writing, you want to improve your citation skills, you want to focus on, highlighting and your note-taking process. So those are all factors that contribute to your success as a writer, or not. I'll I'll post this. I'll send this to you. I'll post this in the history essay module so that you have these questions before you submit that essay. The preliminary draft. And as I previously mentioned, you can attach it in the document or you can type it as a comment. And if you have any trouble with that, just message me and we'll figure out a way for you to get it posted. If worse comes to worse, you can send it to me and I'll basically attach it to your annotated bibliography just so I have it in one place. Any questions about the research process paragraph or any comments? Raise your hand, unmute yourself, or type in the chat. Okay, let me move forward here. Next, I want to talk about some suggestions, things that you can do to avoid some common pitfalls or mistakes that are made in the essay writing process, in the research process. Things that I see, that are common, but I think some of these areas are pretty easy to correct, mistakes that you can correct, or strategies that you can take to help improve the overall quality of your essay writing process. If you're pretty familiar with how to write an essay at the college level, then even high school level, that translates over. Some of you probably have experience from high school and even earlier in the essay writing process. Also, I've had students share that they've never written an essay in high school. That was pretty phenomenal to me that you weren't asked to do that. But if that's the case, then you have the opportunity now to begin the process, and it's going to obviously take probably additional time and consideration to do that. But that's what we have resources here at Southwestern College, and then hopefully I can help you in that process as well to make it as comfortable as possible. The areas to focus on include uh, using your sources, excuse me, adequately and properly. What do I mean by that? Well, the adequate portion focuses on your references, your citations, and highlighting your sources. How well are you able to integrate the use of your sources? And in addition to that, you need to properly use those sources. So you want to find your own voice in the process. You want to talk about your own ideas or your own conclusions in relation to what you've read and researched. You want to provide proper format for those sources. You want to provide a balance. I would avoid obviously copying and pasting. That's very problematic, but just really over relying on your sources. Every paragraph with 3 to 4 sentences that says, according to this, according to that, there's no indication that you're trying to make sense of the information. And then last is providing that works cited page in a proper way. And you're already doing that by beginning the drafting and the creation of your annotated bibliography. And then for that final works cited, you'll list everything that you've used in the process. Let me talk more specifically about the adequate use and the proper use of that information, the areas to focus on. How do I adequately give credit to the sources I'm using? Anything that we read, anything that we use, any ideas that are not unique to ourselves or not created by us need to somehow be referenced. And does anyone know the difference between what I'm titling as a reference and a citation? They're kind of similar. There's some crossover, but does anyone want to explain or define either what a reference might be or a citation might be? And let me know with the group discussion or in chat. What are those two terms? What are they? How do we define them? The highlighting material is really just kind of like emphasizing or focusing on a particular source. So there's no kind of specific definition, but for the references and the citations, I think there are, and definitely for the citations, you've heard that term, right? You've used that in your work before. Citation is when you are actually saying things from a source. You're taking the language directly from the source. You're not making any changes to it, and you're directly quoting from that source, right? So an in-text citation is a quotation from the source that you've used. Here's another important distinction here is that you should reserve those direct quotations for when there's something that you can't really put in your own words. You can't paraphrase. It's so spot on that you want to use it in the essay. That's where you should reserve those in-text quotes and citations. And yeah, you're correct. Gilberto says the references is when you're just kind of getting an idea from something. Yeah, that's true. You're referencing it. So you're saying, according to this historical article, the battle of X, Y, and Z was won by this group. They defeated the other group. You're just emphasizing what they're saying. You're not using their language. You're just kind of summarizing and paraphrasing in a sense. Summarizing would be you're taking a larger statement, a page, and condensing that into a couple sentences or a paragraph, and you're using your own words. Paraphrasing would be taking a quote, say it's 2 sentences, and you're basically rewriting that quote in your own language, your own words. But in all of those cases, the thing that's most important is that you're giving credit to your source. And one of the most simplest ways to do that is just say, according to. It does get repetitive. There's going to be different ways that you want to express that. Author X states that in the article titled blah, 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 it mentions that this author argues. So we're changing the the words that we're using to describe how that's discussed. But thank you for sharing those definitions. And I think that part of the writing process is challenging. We're not in an English class, right? We're not going to go over in great detail the writing process. Unfortunately, we can't spend weeks and weeks and weeks on it, but it is part of the writing process for history. So we have this double task of reading about history, and now we got to write about it, and we have to write about it in an academic fashion. Okay, so how do I properly, let's see, give me one moment. How do I properly use my sources? How do I properly use sources in my writing? If I'm writing an essay, I can't just go off the top of my head. I can't just freestyle it, right? I can't just not use any data because I need to provide some specifics. I need to provide some dates. I need to provide some times. I need to provide some ideas, some perspectives, some experiences in the case of primary sources. Those primary sources are great because they give us a window into the past, and it's like you're sitting there with a person and they're telling you what happened, or the newspaper articles telling you about an event from the perspective of that time period, or the government document, or the royal decree, right? So they're really good, like, kind of windows into the past, but we also have to make sense of them. We still have to analyze them, as you've been doing with the 6 C's worksheet, among other assignments that you've done. You have some experience now with the primary source documents. It's great, and now you can use that to your advantage. Who is going to use MLA format? If you're going to use MLA format, go ahead and raise your hand, or go ahead and type in the chat. I'm going to use the MLA format. And then in addition, if you're not using MLA format, tell us what format you're going to use. I'm curious to see if anyone's going to not use MLA. So far, we got majority MLA, and that's one of the reasons why I list it as like the preferred format. But if you're a psychology major, or if you're a history major and you're already venturing off into using other styles of format, like, we don't, in the discipline of history, we usually use either footnotes or endnotes. So you'll notice in your book, for instance, or in a historical writing, any articles or like books, for instance, we'll have numbers, and then at the bottom we'll provide kind of an explanation of the quote. We build upon, we kind of add to. It's interesting. In history it's a little different, but, and then mostly for English and writing courses, we're using MLA, Chicago style APA. Those are a couple of the other options. So thank you all for sharing. I appreciate you letting us know what source you're going to use. What another thing that I think is important is balance. If you can find some good balance to your essay, is it evident that you took the time to read and really make sense and understand the information you read? You planned out, strategized, and created an outline, for instance, or another kind of initial organization for your essay that helps you kind of visualize, or write down how you're planning to organize the essay. Are you using the proper amount of references, quotes, citations when necessary, but avoid using them when you can explain or paraphrase ideas? Generally, as I'm grading, if I see a paper that is like 90% just quotes and just referencing the sources and no kind of analysis, it either was a situation where someone wasn't able to dedicate the time and energy to create and prepare a well thought out essay, or they didn't understand the material. There's a number of different reasons. So that's why I want to stress that it is going to take time for you to piece everything together, to make the connections, to draw connections, to compare sources, to compare your textbook. But that's what's expected for a college level essay. And then the works cited, did you include both primary and secondary sources? I didn't list this in the prompt, but one thing that might be helpful for you is if you can even separate, like you can put a heading primary sources, 1, 2, 3, secondary sources, 1, 2, 3. That's always helpful for me, just then I know right off the bat. But you don't have to do that. I didn't require you to do that. I didn't put that in the prompt, so I'm not going to, change that now. But if that's something that's helpful for you, then you're welcome to go ahead and do that. Okay, last I just want to share the resources that we've reviewed the first one with Ali, the librarian that joined us at our last class Zoom meeting. But I'm just going to briefly show you for those of you who might have not been here or just to revisit it real quick. Then I want to share two other websites that you might be familiar with. One I just stumbled upon when I was preparing for this presentation, but I think it's like super helpful. So I hope out of these three, I think that's going to be a super helpful source. Angelo asked if we need to use 2 primary sources and 2 secondary. Yeah, correct. So I asked you to find a total of 4 sources, 2 primary, 2 secondary. You're more than welcome to use more. You already have 1 secondary, which is a textbook. And then depending on what you're researching, we may have already used a primary source that you can use in your essay. Okay, so the history research guide, this is what we went over with Ali, so I won't spend a whole bunch of time, but I'll just give you my take on it. You're beginning your research, the primary sources, history research by era or geography. So these are the 3 important areas here. I'm just going to skip straight to the research by era or geography. This is presuming you have a topic. And then for our class, the important ones would be Mexico history, California history, or it can even be US history before 1877. Okay. I think this guide here, the U.S. history before 1877, excuse me, will be super useful for any of you who are researching the Mexican American War. Another topic that I didn't see anyone covering yet, I don't think. If you are covering it, just remind me in the chat. The battle for Texas, that's a super interesting topic too. I'll just give you a brief summary of what that involves. As you know, Texas was part of Mexico. 1821, Mexico gains independence. Mexico had a big challenge. They had this swath of land in the north, which is, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, parts of Utah, Colorado, California, Nevada. So you can imagine that whole area there. That's part of Mexico, but the U.S. is expanding, westward expansion. How are they going to protect that land? There's really nobody there settled in that area, and that's a huge area. One of the strategies they employ is to invite settlers from the United States who are already kind of coming into the territory of Texas y Coahuila. It was actually 2 states at the time. Later on, Coahuila would become a Mexican state. Texas would become part of the U.S. But before they were part of the U.S., they fought for their own independence. They gained independence, and they were a independent nation, so to speak. If you've heard the term Lone Star State, that's where that derives from. So it's really, I mean, you could probably argue it carries over even today. You see, Texas is a very independent-minded state. They like to do things on their own, especially with the kind of political nature of things that are going on right now. So that would be a potential topic for any of you who are interested. But yeah, going back to this resource here, you can use the research by era geography. So I think that's super helpful. Who has already used this guide? Who has had an opportunity to use the guide? Go ahead and raise your hand if you had an opportunity to do so. If you're on PC, or I don't know if the mobile option gives you the option to raise your hand. But there's some little actions that you can take here. All right. So before I move forward, oh, let me show you the other guides. I'm sorry. Here we go. The online writing lab by Purdue is a great resource. It's the guide for all your citation questions. Any format questions, how do I format say I found this paragraph that's a little long for a quote. So you don't want to use that a whole bunch of times throughout your essay, but say you found a paragraph that's like spot on and you want to use it. One tip is that you'll need to create what's called a block quote, and those are for quotes. It's anything longer than like 2 sentences or about 4 lines in your essay. So you can use Purdue OWL to find out how to do that. That's one question that I often get is how do I quote this? Or I'll see it in your rough draft and I'll ask you to reformat it if it's not formatted properly. All right, and then the last resource that you can use is one that I found today, but I think earlier today when I was just kind of looking around for potential resources, and I haven't explored it in great detail, but I found it helpful. This is on the topic that you're studying for the class, history. It's based on the discipline of history. It's created by, I believe, the history department. It has guides for getting started. It has a guide for a final checklist for writing essays. So let's just take a brief view at it. Does my paper respond to the assignment? Did you focus on the narrative history aspect of the essay that's discussed in the prompt? Go back and take a look at before you submit your essay, go back and take a look at the prompt. Check off everything. Make sure you're meeting all of those marks so that you can ensure that you're going to get a good score on the assignment, that you're not going to miss points for something that's easily avoidable. Is it organized? Does it make sense going from kind of point A to point B? Are you able to use transitions from point to point? Those are all the things that unfortunately we can't spend a great amount of time on, but I'm hoping to see that reflected in your essay. And if you have no idea of what that entails, start thinking about how you're going to research and learn about that process. Is my argument well developed? You're not really, you are providing a thesis, which is telling me what you're going to discuss, but I'm not asking you to take a side per se. You're more than welcome to do so. So that's one that's not necessarily applicable to our essay, but it's still something you might want to consider. Is my tone appropriate to the assignment? Is it too casual or just like, hey, well, yeah, professor, like, this happened, whatever, like, using LOL and using like that type of language. Obviously in an email or something, that's fine. For an essay, it has to be a little bit more formal than that. It has to be in a academic manner as best as possible, right? And just in addition to that, I know I've been giving you a lot of information today, but if you're going to make claims in the paper, so let's say, for instance, let's just say you're writing about the U.S.-Mexico War, Mexican-American War, and you say the U.S. was the most racist, the biggest bully of a nation, and basically the most horrific country in the world because of the way they treated Mexico. If that's your claim in the paper, then you need to provide evidence that supports that claim. You can't make these grandiose claims and not provide evidence, supporting evidence. So that may indeed be the case, or at least you may be able to argue that point, but you do need to include evidence that supports that. So it might be something that I totally agree with you. It might be something that I might challenge you on. At any rate, any claims that you make, those like larger claims, you need to provide evidence, right? If you say, Mexico lost to the United States in the war, that's general knowledge. I don't need you to provide, a citation for that, but then you're going to go and explain what that entails. Did you spell check it? I think this is a great checklist because it really does ask the questions that I'll be, looking at as I review your essay. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. It feels a little different being in front of the camera and talking for this long. I know we haven't necessarily done that as of yet, but I'll go ahead and pause, and I just want to ask what questions you have. Go ahead and share with us. Uh, Unmute yourself if you feel more comfortable in the chat. You know that's always a good way to go. What questions or comments do you have about the preliminary draft, the instructor suggestions, excuse me, and the resources that I went over with you? For the writing sources, do we have to include them in your essay? What would you mind explaining what you're referencing for the writing sources? Is that just like your sources you're going to use, the ones that you found? The question was for the writing sources, do we have to include them in our essay? I'm not sure what the writing sources are, but if you maybe rephrase it, I can probably make sense of it. A little off topic, but will these Zoom sessions be more like office hours or will they be lectures as well? Up to this point, it's been kind of focusing on the essay. I do want to, and if we have time today, I can talk a little bit about like the reading that we're doing right now and talk about some of the major themes. Definitely, hopefully for the next Zoom session, I'll focus on what we've been reading and just hopefully I can even give you some questions to consider before we meet. I haven't done that as of yet, but that might be a good strategy, and we can even kind of break into smaller groups, breakout rooms. If that's something that sounds like if that sounds like something that you're interested, let me know. But yeah, I haven't up to this point. I haven't really yet, lectured on the material that we've covered so far, and I haven't created like weekly lecture videos. It's a little more challenging for me, but I'm hoping to integrate that in, and hopefully for the next Zoom meeting, I can do so. Thank you for the question. What day is the preliminary draft due? You have until the end of the weekend this week. As far as the due date, I put week 6 or week 7, so technically you have until the end of week 7. If you need a couple extra days, I'll leave it open. There won't be any, penalty. So say if you submit it by next week, like Monday or Tuesday, you'll be fine. I'll send out an announcement saying I'm getting ready to close it. Please submit your preliminary drafts, and just to make sure everybody's had an opportunity to do so. I wanted to fill you in a little bit more today about what I was looking for the preliminary draft. Are there any other questions or comments that I can answer for the class? Oh, list of topics, ideas for the essay. Perfect. Why don't we go ahead and take a break, like 7-minute break. We'll meet back at around 2:10. I'll talk about, or let's say 2:11, or about 7 minutes from when I stop. I'll talk about the essay topic ideas and if we have time, I'll briefly discuss. I have a little PowerPoint presentation that kind of coincides with what you're reading this week, which is the colonial economy, and we'll talk about that. Any other questions before we take the break, class? Thank you all so much for the input and for your questions. I appreciate it. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and start the break. Thank you so much for hanging in with me today, and I'll see you in a few minutes. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I hope your break was good. Got me a little tired, actually. Let me go ahead and share the list of potential essay topics. If you have questions about your essay topic, uh, type it in the chat. Let me know, or unmute yourself. Let's chat about it. But let me share with you. This is a general list, but it might be helpful to consider some of the potential topics. And this can be obviously expanded upon. These are just kind of off the top of my head type of potential topics, and can be applied to other groups, to other events. Beginning with the Mesoamerican period, you can look at the Aztecs. There's going to be a bunch of information on the Aztecs. We have some classmates who are writing about um, architecture, agriculture, religion, society, political organization, so to speak. And those facets of society can be investigated for any of these groups, such as the Maya, such as the Olmec. You can look at the influence of the Maya and mathematics or astrology, for instance, or the architecture, the building of temples, religious centers. You could do a comparison between groups. You could talk about the Aztec versus the Maya. What were some of the similarities? What were some of the differences? One of right off the bat, one of the distinctions between these groups is obviously the geography. The Maya were predominantly in southern Mexico, coastal parts of Mexico, and into what would today be considered Central America, Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, among other places. That was the reach of those groups. And the way in which they organized their society was different than the way, say the Aztecs did. The Olmecs, or the predecessors, they're kind of seen as the originators of Mesoamerican civilization, or the first. There's a lot of questions about what influenced them, especially their heads. There's been debates about connections between Africa and the Olmecs. Those have been pretty much disputed um, by historians, at least, but there have been some kind of like, I'm not gonna say conspiracy theories, but ideas about that have been, at least to my knowledge, haven't been deemed fully credible. Mesoamerican art would be an expansion or something that you could talk about for all these groups. Hernan Cortés, Tenochtitlan, Teotihuacan, the arrival of the Spanish in Mexico. So that's in the initial arrival of Cortés on the coast, 1519, and then La Noche Triste, which would be the defeat of the Spanish, the initial defeat of the Spanish in their attempt to conquer, to take power in Tenochtitlan. The Spanish invasion and conquest of Tenochtitlan. So that would be the the second part of that process, the successful part of that invasion and conquest. And I'll make a couple real quick distinctions for those of you who are looking at any of these topics. One thing that I think is important is the use of allies. The Spanish were very small compared to those in Tenochtitlan and the Aztecs. So how could they pose any kind of formidable will, or how could they be a threat? Well, they used those who were being ruled by the Aztecs, those who had a dislike for or wanted to see the Aztecs defeated. They used that to their advantage. They created alliances, and they used that to topple the power structure. Another thing is, once the most supreme leader or ruler is taken out, the tradition in many Mesoamerican societies was that the people under would not necessarily rebel, but would actually conform to that power, conform to the new leader. So that might be one reason why, you often hear the argument about how could such a small group defeat such a large group. Well, the way in which things happened might be a little different than what we might presume. So hopefully, if you're interested in those topics, you can investigate that more. You can talk about Moctezuma. You can talk about some of the topics I mentioned earlier: art, religion, agriculture, social organization. Spanish colonial society. That's a huge topic, a broad topic. So, what do you want to potentially discuss in those areas? Spain and New Mexico during the colonial era, women in New Spain, and this is another one where you're going to have to focus a little bit more about where you're going to research. The Spanish and indigenous in California, 1700s, the California mission system, the Alta and Baja California. Let me add one other one I didn't have here, but that is going to be important during this colonial area is the importation of slaves to New Spain, the African presence in New Spain, and is another one that you can potentially talk about that. There's a heavy African presence in New Spain, especially in the southern coastal areas. Uh, there's the founding of the first kind of free city, so to speak, where a famous Mexican, or I guess at that point, I don't know if you consider it Mexican. I don't know if it was part of Mexico at the time. It was under the rule of Spain, but uh, Gaspar Yanga, who founded this town, and there's a big history about him. So you can, that might be a potential topic that you can talk about. Women in New Spain, I talked about that already. Mexican independence, you can talk about that. It's a huge topic. Benito Juarez, Guadalupe Victoria, some of the presidents, Mexican presidents, early Mexican presidents. Tejanos and Anglo-Texans in the fight for Texas independence. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna is like a really interesting character in Mexican history, and someone who, if you're not sure, what you're going to research, and you want to research somebody that has a fascinating history, that's a good choice. And last would be the Mexican American War, and by extension, we can say the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Is anyone talking about any of these topics? Let us know what essay topic are you going to research? Let us know in the chat. And let me see here. Can you give some examples of the advances the Aztecs made? Battle of Alamos, Teotihuacan, Battle of Alamos, great. That's like a big turning point in the war for Texas independence because of what happened. And Santa Ana is a big part of that Battle of the Alamo story. Can I give some examples of advances the Aztecs made? There's a number of different advances that they made, either through their creation of an orderly society. One of the comments from the first Europeans that set foot in Tenochtitlan is in regards to the order and cleanliness of Tenochtitlan. They were able to build irrigation systems. They were able to build freshwater systems. They were able to build dams in the Lake of Texcoco. They were able to build chinampas, which were like these floating, so to speak, floating islands where they were able to grow and domesticate agriculture. They were able to, in regards to their military presence, they expanded their empire quite drastically. They made advances in medicine and surgery. They made advances in mathematics, in engineering, with the creation of their temples. There's a lot of questions about their predecessors. Like we have someone who's going to research Teotihuacan, so that's a good start there. Like looking at Teotihuacan and the influence connection to the Aztecs. We have someone else who's talking about the Aztec society and religion and their view of the world, their view of deities, their view of gods. You've learned a little bit about that in the textbook, and also you've seen some examples of how that's been professed in the smart history videos and those discussions. I really like those videos because I think they, especially with the art, they do a good job of explaining and providing context for the pieces that they're reviewing. So I think those are some of the initial ideas that come to mind when you think about the Aztec, and they're the preeminent group that's known in Mesoamerica. They're probably the most popular, most well-known group when you talk about Mesoamerican civilizations. But each group had um, their own distinct advances that they made or influences. There's a lot of overlap. There's connections. There's trade. There's commerce. There's networks that are established from the Inca to the Maya, Inca in South America to the Maya in Central and North America to the Aztec, in North America to other groups in the borderlands and into what would be today the US Southwest and even further. So we find jade coming from southern Mexico, making its way up to the north. Maize, corn travels up to the north. Potatoes as well make their way. There's goods and items that are produced in the northern regions that make their way down south. So there's this big trading system. And it's interesting to think about how those are developed because we don't have a lot of information about that, right? Any question in the chat? Any ideas to write about on Teotihuacan? I would probably talk about one, the structures are impressive. They're super impressive. So you can focus on the significance and the meaning of the structures, the pyramids, their location, their relation to the cosmos and astrology, religion. In addition, you could talk about any connections made between the Aztecs or the Teotihuacanos and other Mesoamerican groups. So those would probably be the areas that I focus on. You can even expand that and talk about more kind of the modern importance of this place, what it means today. I mean, that could be the part of the discussion. Tourism is huge there. So, how did, for instance, the pandemic impact places like that? I had the opportunity to go there, I think in 2019, right? Before everything kind of happened. It's a super impressive place, but it's very touristy. It's very like there is that in other words, to say, there's a town right next to it. So there's that influence. Obviously, the people that live around there and the vendors are making a living and are supported by tourism. So it's super important. But once you climb and once you go on the structures, you're in awe, really. But just my last point, I went to another place, and the name of it is like, it's slipping my mind right now, but it's another place in Jalisco, the state of Jalisco in Mexico. They're round. They have these round structures there. They're like round pyramids. They're nowhere near the size of Teotihuacan. But that site was super impressive because it was kind of removed from the town. It was on its own, and we had a tour guide that was very informative, told us all the story. And yeah, we even got to climb one of those structures. So my experience at both was great, but the smaller site was more impressive because I was able to like kind of tune in more with it. Whereas Teotihuacan would be as busy as it is, it's maybe a little harder to do that. So, but that doesn't take away from the impressiveness of it. Has anyone visited any of the pyramids or temples in Mexico or in Central America? And what were your thoughts when you got to check these places out? I'd be curious to see, what you thought. Well, I've only seen the ones near Cancun. Yeah, I heard those are really beautiful, and I know there's some that are like right by the water. I don't know if that's the same place that I'm thinking of, but Tulum, I guess, is obviously one Mayan site. Jen got to visit Teotihuacan. They are impressive. Yeah, it's like when you climb to the top is when you're like, oh wow, this is amazing. And so you try to soak it in and you try to imagine what it was like to be there, to think that there was a civilization. First, even considering how it's built, there's no beast of burden. There's no like cattle, there's no ox, there's no big animals to carry, large stones. So it's literally was people power, human power, I don't want to say manpower because we know there's more than men involved in the process, right? La Quemada in Zacatecas, a very impressive place. Wow, that sounds like a cool place. I haven't been there, and I got to put that on the list. The place I visited, just to briefly give you, if you're ever, I know a lot of Jalisco is like a popular state to visit, especially Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta. I think that this spot probably from well, it might be close to both. I'm not sure, but the place I went to was Guachimontones, and this is I'll just show you some pictures, some web pictures. I have my own pictures, but just to make it quick here, and then we'll kind of wrap everything up. But yeah, these are they don't look too big. They don't look. I mean, you look at them, and you're like, well, this isn't stone and like as massive, but it was really cool. And we, like I mentioned, we got to scale one, and I think the tour guide was probably set it apart, like I mentioned. But it's a really cool place to go visit. It's off the beaten path. It's probably not as popular as a lot of the other places, but if you ever get a chance to go check it out, definitely do so. Thank you all for sharing your your vacation details and the opportunities that you had to go visit some of these historic places. And I mean, there's so many in Mexico, in the United States. We have all these different sites that are very impressive. So um, before we wrap it up, I think we're kind of running out of time here, but let me go ahead and let me go ahead and pause. If anyone has any questions, comments about what we talked about today, just to reiterate, I'll have the link up for your preliminary draft, and I'll give you the details for that little paragraph you have to type. So that'll be part of your work, upcoming work.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
If we hadn't posted our essay topic yet, is it worth still posting, or is it kind of like
Go ahead
too
and
late?
go ahead and post it, and I'll take a look at it. And yeah, let's get you going on the points for that portion of the essay topic. But yeah,
Okay.
go ahead and submit it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Uh, any other questions or anything you guys want to add that the class wants to add?
Yes, just one question regarding the essay topic. If you didn't write anything, it means that it's okay to use, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And if you want me to like go back and give you a little video feedback, I'll be glad to do it. It'll probably be sometime tomorrow or Wednesday as far as like when I would be able to do that. But if not, if you're interested in that, just message me and then we'll go from there.
Okay, perfect.
Because I was able to do that for some folks, and then I had to move on to something else, and I wasn't able to. I wanted to go back and do it for everybody, but it was I had to kind of move forward. So, but yeah, if you didn't get the video comment and you want one, just message me and I'll send you something. Because I think in that case I can go into a little more detail, like, oh, this, I might have some questions, or maybe provide some more emphasis on something. Okay, if you want to stick around, I'll just use, I think we have like 10 more minutes or whatever, 15 more minutes maybe. Is that right? But I'll talk a little bit about the colonial economy, just spend maybe like 10 minutes chatting with you all about that. If you're interested, stick around. If you gotta go, or you wanna, you're not interested in hearing um my kind of just some broad discussion about that, just to make some connections between the reading, the chapter for this week, and some PowerPoint material that I had. So if you're interested, stick around. If not, I'll see you in 2 weeks. I think we have a meeting in 2 weeks. I know there's some a little bit of a different schedule for spring break, so I'm not sure if we're affected by that or not. But all right. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen, and I'm just gonna go over. This is just this PowerPoint presentation is a part of a bigger presentation, but I think we can kind of talk a little bit about This is the bigger presentation, and I'll go ahead and post it just if you want to take a look at it. This is something that was created with a different textbook or an earlier version of the textbook, so it might not directly translate to our textbook, but it's still the ideas and much of the discussion is pretty similar. So we're looking at land, labor, and governance in the colony, and the economic part is obviously regarding the labor, regarding the land, regarding the industry. You know, how would the economy operate in New Spain? How was the Viceroyalty of New Spain organized economically, socially, politically, and culturally? These viceroyalties are kind of like regions. All of the Spanish colonial holdings were divided into viceroyalties, and what we would consider today Mexico, some of Central America, the Southwest US, is the Viceroyalty of New Spain. And one of the things that carries over is the way that labor is organized. And one of the common practices in earlier pre-Columbian civilizations were to extract labor from each household. Subjects would generally, those being ruled, like kind of the commoners, would send somebody to go do work for a project that the king or those in power have deemed as necessary. So we need to build a religious temple. We need to build a road. We need to build an irrigation system. We need to establish a marketplace. You know, things that required different forms of physical labor that would be extracted from generally from each household. And there was a couple of different ways in which I was organized, both either under the Incan rulers or the Aztec rulers. So this would be the example, the Aztec example. Under this system, so I'm going to say it, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher it because my Nahuatl is not good at all, but Cuaticuel. This is the Nahuatl name for the similar structure employed by Aztecs to extract labor. Under this system, each adult male Indian had to contribute 45 days of labor a year. And so the Spanish kind of take those reins over. They organize it in like 3 or 4 distinct ways. The repartimiento. This is like a brutal system. This is compared to kind of the enslavement of native peoples. This is in effect during that early stage, and it doesn't even really make its way into Mexico, so to speak. But the encomienda system is really the initial form of labor organization and establishing that relationship of production. Those early conquistadores who had arrived were granted land and were granted like the right to utilize Indian labor. They were supposed to Christianize them in the same breath, but often that didn't happen. It was generally an extraction of labor. It didn't last very long. Like it wasn't a way necessarily for the early Spanish conquistadores to get rich, so to speak, but they did gain land and they did gain tribute, which was meaning that labor was offered by natives, or not offered, but it was extracted. It was taken by force. And then the haciendas were kind of a different, but related to that same organization. These were big landowners, hacendados, who created haciendas. They were often self-serving. They sometimes had their own church. They had their own kind of little market for the workers. The peasants or the workers, those working off the land, were given some land to till. And those who were outside also could come in and get work as well. And those who lived outside would pay tribute to access water on the hacienda. The hacienda would have rights to water, to other important resources. So these were just kind of some of the ways in which these relationships existed. The patrones, the peones, the campesinos, the vaqueros, and of course, by extension, especially with the importation of slaves, we have the esclavos that arrived from Africa, an estimated 200,000 that arrived in Mexico during the period of slavery in Mexico. Historically, this is something that hasn't really been discussed, even in my learning of like Chicano Latino studies, especially as an undergrad. There wasn't much emphasis or discussion about this, but yeah, and then historically in Mexico, it hasn't been something that's been taught, at least to my knowledge from research and talking to people who have gone through the educational system in Mexico. Maybe your experience might be different. I'd be glad to hear if that was the case and hear about that. But something that has come more to the forefront, you know, in the modern era, and specifically as we're talking about Black politics in the U.S., and then by extension, how that is connected to larger movements of people from the African diaspora. And so that's kind of just building off what I was mentioning earlier. And this is what I had talked to the class about earlier, was Gaspar Yanga, the first liberator of the Americas. Over the approximately 300 years it lasted, the slave trade brought about 200,000 Africans to the colony. Many Blacks were born in Mexico and followed their parents into slavery. Not until 1829 was the institution abolished by leaders of the newly independent nation. And I think, just on a side note, there is a difference if you think about African slavery in Mexico versus the United States, and there's some distinctions. If you're interested in talking about that more, I'd be glad to discuss it. But first, we're just kind of recognizing how this has been something that has not been discussed or maybe overlooked, but still is obviously an important part of the Mexican historical record. And more recently, thinking about the census and how Africans and people of African descent in Mexico are counted. That's something that's like a more recent topic. This talks a little bit about the political institutions, but just to kind of wrap up, and I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to mention kind of what is discussed in the textbook that you're reading, the chapter you're reading for this week. It talks about the control of the crown over New Spain. One of the things that hampered the development of Mexico economically was that relationship between the colonies. So there wasn't much internal development. There was a high reliance upon imported goods from Spain. And in some cases, there were laws that said you can only buy these items from Spain. You can only buy these items that are imported. And we see that similarly in the United States when the crown and the colonies have that relationship. So it's an advantage for the crown because they're getting money sent back. They're merchants, right? They're selling goods to their own colony. But it's a disadvantage for the colony because there isn't the creation of places of modes of production. They're not creating centers to produce goods for consumption in New Spain. Instead, they're heavily relying on these imported goods. It's not very efficient. It's not very developmental for Mexico, so to speak. So those are some of the things that you'll read about this in the chapter for this week, if you haven't done so already. I'll just kind of leave it at that. A little, I don't want to get too long-winded and lose your attention, but I just want to say thank you all for joining today. If you're interested in, I'll send out a survey to the class, see if you're interested in doing more of the kind of lecture part and doing the breakouts for the Zoom meetings. And maybe we can divide it like half and half, where we talk about, you know, the essay for the first part, and the second part, we can do a breakout and discuss the reading or the assignments that pertain to the content that we're reading for the week. All right. I want to say thank you all. Have a great day. If you need to speak to me personally, please let me know in the chat right now. If not, I'll talk to you all soon. I'll have some feedback for you on your other assignments in addition to the essay topic. You all have a great day. Take care. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had the opportunity to get vaccinated if that's something you're interested in. That's the good news that's going on right now.
All right. I got my first doses. Moderna, Professor.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was lucky to get both, so I'm good to go, feeling better, and I'm glad to hear everybody. Like, I'm hearing everybody's stories about it, so it's bringing a lot of hope.
Yeah. All right.
Well, you guys have a great day. Thank you, and take care.
You too, Professor.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.